gentlemen, the Brit Pack is back. Simon Head and Chamatkar Sandhu back in your earphones once again with all the latest news, views and opinions on the wild and wacky world of mixed martial arts, but of course with a distinctly British flavour. My name is Simon Head. On Skype is Mr. Chamatkar Sandhu. It is Monday, September the 5th, 2016, and coming up on this week's show, we talk about UFC Fight Night Hamburg. I was over there last week. Plenty of stories to tell you about Fight Week itself, and of course about Fight Night, as Josh the War Master Barnett came out the big winner, taking on and beating former UFC heavyweight champion, fellow former UFC heavyweight champion, Andrei the Pitbull Arlovski. We will then throw forward to next weekend in Cleveland, Ohio, and UFC 203 as Stipe Miocic looks to successfully defend that UFC heavyweight title for the very first time when he takes on the Ream himself, Alistair Overeem. We will then answer your questions as tweeted to us via our Twitter account at the Brit Pack MMA, and that will be our show. Chamatkar Sandhu is joining me as always via the magical world of Skype. Sandhu, how are you, buddy?
I'm very well, Si. It's good to speak to you again. And yeah, you were abroad. You were in Hamburg, Germany. I was listening and hearing a lot of Italian voices because I was in Venice, Italy this past weekend. It's a trip that me and my wife have been talking about doing for quite some time, about 5 years in the making, actually. And we put it on the agenda for 2016. And I have to say, it turned out to be one of our most favorite holidays we've ever had. It was beautiful. It was hot. It was 29 degrees every day, clear blue skies, and just going through the canals and rivers of Venice was just a sight to behold, and definitely an experience I'm never going to forget. It ended up coinciding with the Venice Film Festival, which I completely had no idea about. So that was pretty cool, having all the stars of Hollywood in town for a weekend. And lots of gelato was consumed. It was just a lot of pasta, a lot of pizza. It was a lot of wine. So it was all in all a good time in Venice, and it was good to actually completely shut off from the world of mixed martial arts. When I mean I went off the radar for 3 or 4 days, I went completely off the radar. I literally just logged on to go to the UFC Hamburg Wikipedia page on Sunday morning just to quickly scan through the results, which we'll kind of get to later on in the show. But yeah, I was completely off, and it was kind of a little soothing for the mind just to kind of step away from the sport that we love and we're so passionate about, just for a few days, recharge the batteries, and then get back in the swing of things, which I did today. But yeah, it was a good trip. But I really want to find out about Hamburg and Germany and how Fight Week was with you and our friends in the international media circle. So tell me, what was it like for you being in Hamburg this week, Si?
It was great. I've been to Germany twice before. I went to Gelsenkirchen for the World Cup, where I spent a ridiculously over-the-top amount of money trying to watch England v Portugal, which was a pointless exercise in the end because I got in, we had the worst seats in the house, England didn't score a goal and we lost on penalties. So that wasn't the best investment of money I've ever made in my life. Second trip was a bit better. I went to Berlin for UFC Fight Night last year, and that went pretty well. That was a good trip. We had some fun over in Berlin, and we had some fun over in Hamburg this time round. As I say, never been to Hamburg before. The Fighter Hotel was the Radisson Blu in Hamburg, which I was reliably informed was the tallest building in the city, and it was huge. And when I checked in, they put me on the very top floor. So I was on the top floor of the tallest building in Hamburg. So much so that only one of the elevators in the building actually took you to this floor. It was like I was on like the presidential suite or something. It was just a standard room, but that's where they put me. I mean, if there'd have been a fire, I'd have been toast. I'd have been the last one out. But it was the views were pretty spectacular. And as for Fight Week itself, mate, it was good fun. Some of these European fight cards don't necessarily have the same amount of star power as you get over in the States, and certainly not on a pay-per-view show. But what you do get is you get fighters who are sometimes a little bit more willing to express themselves and to tell their story, and it's an opportunity for them to really raise their profile and get out there. And we saw plenty of that this week, and we saw a few bizarre stories as well. There's one that if you've been off the grid, you probably haven't picked up on this, but Peter Sobotta is a name that I'm sure you're familiar with, and I'm sure that those who've been watching the UFC for a few years will have heard his name. He's fought a good few times in the octagon. Born in Poland and brought up in Germany, he's effectively got dual nationality. And almost every fight week, he's asked, are you representing Poland or are you representing Germany? And he's grown tired of this. And he's taken radical steps to avoid upsetting one of his parent nations by abandoning both of them. What he decided to do, and when he told us this on Media Day, everyone was just looking at each other. He decided that as of this past weekend, he's representing Jamaica. And we were
lovely.
It made, as soon as he said it, we were like, did he just say Jamaica? And we sort of asked him a few more questions, and turned out he's never been to Jamaica. He's met some Jamaican people. He loves the reggae music, and that for him is enough. And so he's decided to fly the flag. I mean, if you go back on UFC Fight Pass and watch his fight with Nicholas Dalby, and I'll talk to you about his fight with Dalby in a bit, when the tail of the tape comes up on the screen, it says, or there's a flag there to denote the nationality that he's representing, and it's the Jamaican flag. So there we go. So we did that. And when I interviewed, when I was part of the scrum, it was actually Louise Green from MMA Crazy who he was talking to when he actually talked about this. And it was in scrum, so I've got the video. And we turned a little video around, and we're just sitting in a hotel bar. We're based in a hotel bar to do all our editing, and kicking a few ideas around. And we thought, wouldn't it be great if we put some reggae music just underneath it? And then someone else suggested you should get Bob Marley going, "Ooh yeah," at various points during the interview. So a little bit of video editing from me and our mutual friend Abby Saban jumped on the clip and used his black belt final cut skills to just make it look a little bit better. And we had a mini viral hit during a week. And Peter Sobotta retweeted it himself, and it became a little thing. It was good fun. But we had loads of different things happen that week. Went round with a selfie camera, got all the fighters to record selfie messages for the UK fans, which was good fun. I know our press row colleague John Morgan looked at me as if he basically looked at me and said, "Sire, that's not going to work. These guys aren't going to do that." I'm like, "Yeah, it'll be fine. It'll all be good." And even Andrei Arlovski did it. And Andrei Arlovski...
Wow. I'm surprised at that, because I've interviewed Arlovski a few times, and he's not the easiest chap to interview, especially to try and get him to do something gimmicky like that. So for him to jump on board with something like that, that's impressive, Si. Well done.
It was funny. I mean, Alex Gustafsson looked at me like I'd just handed him a fresh turd or something when I gave him the camera. He didn't really know what was going on. He looked at his manager, Thomas, who just sort of nodded at him and said, "Yeah, just go with it." And to be fair, he did all right. And we got everybody on Media Day with the exception of Tai Hyung Bang, who doesn't speak any English. I've got all the English-speaking guys on there. You can go back and check that out. That's knocking around. It's on my YouTube page. It's on my Twitter, and it's on the Sun website. So lots of fun and games like that. The city we didn't get to see that much of because we were just nose to the grindstone for most of it. We did get to go down and check out the carnage of the Reaper Barn for one evening. That place is crazy. Make sure you've got your cab fare home in your pocket. It's unbelievable. It's like the cantina from Star Wars, but in street form. It was just one of the craziest places I've ever been. But we survived that and made it to Fight Night, and UFC Fight Night in Hamburg. So it was fight week was good. We got some good stories. It was all good fun.
Well, I mean, when I looked at the Wikipedia page for UFC Fight Night Hamburg, I literally just wanted to find out what the results were. Didn't really care about watching the fights at the time. Obviously, since I've been back home, I've had a chance to look at a few of the fights. I saw the main card. Well, I started watching the main card. I haven't finished watching the main card yet as we record this podcast this week. But I saw Sergeant Nick Hine get his hand raised with this decision victory. I saw the highlight performance of the weekend, no doubt, with Ryan Bader knocking out Ilir Latifi with almost like an MVP, Michael Venom Page style knee to the head. I haven't seen any of the other performances yet, but just first of all, looking at the entire card top to bottom, I see a lot of decisions. I don't see too many finishes. What was the reaction like from the crowd in the arena? What was the pace of the entire fight card like for you, as a viewer watching Cageside, Si?
Well, the pacing of the event was great because it was a Fight Pass card. So for everyone around the world, obviously in the UK we get it on BT Sport, but it's a Fight Pass card. That's what everybody else in the world watched this event on. So the actual pacing, fight to fight to fight, was pretty snappy. There wasn't a lot of dead time between fights, which was great. So from that experience, it was as good as you could hope for. And the fact that we had so many decisions, and even the finishes that we did have, we had 3 finishes on the card, and 2 of them were in the third round. So yeah, all of the fights actually went a little way before anything happened. So from that point of view, the fact that it was a fast-paced event in terms of going from one fight to the other, that kept it going. If this had been on Fox, then you could imagine how hard going it might have been. So just to quickly run you through some of the highlight or sort of the main talking points. Let's talk about the 2 British guys first. Scott Askham took on Jack Hermanson, second fight of the night, and that was one of the fights looking down the fight card that a lot of us media guys were really looking forward to. We thought it was a good stylistic matchup, both really big, rangy middleweight fighters, both in good form. Askham obviously coming off that ridiculous head kick knockout of Chris Dempsey at UFC Fight Night in London. Jack Hermanson coming into the UFC as a Cage Warriors middleweight champion and on something like an 8-fight win streak. So really interested to see how that fight goes. Askham started the fight very well. I thought he won the first round. Hermanson was being very sort of languid and awkward and looked like he was trying to work out Askham's timing, throwing a lot of oblique kicks and lower leg kicks. Askham, meanwhile, was trying to suss out Hermanson and was finding a home for his straight left quite regularly by the end of that first round. So it was all looking good for him. Then Hermanson started to turn up the pace in the second round. Whether there were any octagon jitters in the first, I don't know, but he looked a lot more at home in the second round. And when the fight was in the clinch, Hermanson dominated the fight in the clinch through a lot of uppercuts. That was his honey punch, really. And by the end of the second round, Askham looked pretty gassed out. Physically, he looked superb in fight week. He looked, there were Instagram pictures that he took, looking much more lean, much more defined, muscular physique. And but for whatever reason, by the end of the second round, he was pretty spent, and Hermanson won it down a stretch and and picked up the decision.
Sometimes it's not always what sometimes what a fighter looks like aesthetically on the outside can be misleading. It's sometimes more important what's under, and I think the best example of that is someone like Nate Diaz, who maybe on the outside he's not the most muscular guy, but obviously we know he's got a gas tank and he can go all 5 rounds, at a pretty high level. But yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate for Scott. Obviously, I haven't seen the fight for myself. But all in all, you think that was a fair decision to go Jack's way?
Yeah, I do. I tell you what, the last round of that fight was superb. I'll definitely go back and watch that one. That's definitely one to go back and watch. What I would say is, if you get to the end of that fight, don't watch the next one. Christian Colombo versus Jarvis Dano is up there with one of the worst fights I've ever seen. So I'll leave it at that. If you want to see whether my assessment matches your assessment of what is a bad fight, by all means go back and watch it. I'll warn you now, you're not going to get those 15 minutes back. So
I'll take your word for it.
Taylor Lapalus looked very, very good against Leandro Issa. French guy moving his way up the bantamweight ranks. We've seen him a lot on the European shows. He looked very good. Watch out for him. Ashley Evans-Smith against Veronica Macedo. This was an interesting fight. We spoke with Ashley Evans-Smith in the week. She's a superb interviewee. She's got a really interesting story. Comes across really well. And if she continues to progress, you can see her becoming a bit of a star. She took on Veronica Macedo, who's from Venezuela. She's travelled all around the world. I think she was training at a Jan Blachowicz gym in Poland. But she's no way a women's bantamweight fighter. She's a strawweight, or at best a 125er. But she looked quite good. She was throwing some spectacular spinning stuff in the first round, and looked really, 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 really exciting to watch. But in the end, Ashley just had a bit too much for her. Was just a bit too big, and eventually wore her down and finished her with elbows in the third. Peter Sobotta v Nicholas Dalby. So the man from Jamaica, who's never been to Jamaica, against the man from Denmark, and another guy who I've got a lot of time for, Nicholas Dalby. And he's
a media darling, isn't he? He's friends with a lot of us in the media. He's one of those guys that's really taken to us, and he's actually done a bit of media work as well. I think he's quite the photographer, if I'm not mistaken.
He is, and also he at UFC 199 in LA, I bumped into him. And he was doing some job shadowing with the UFC. He'd written an email to the UFC to talk about their outfitting policy,
right?
And had expressed a few different opinions, given a bit of feedback. And then not long after that, they invited him to go and shadow the UFC athlete equipment team, and he was part of the team that decided what goes into the athlete packs and the kit they get,
cool.
The kit they get, and all that. And he was actually doing that at 199 in LA, and I got to talk to him about it then. And he had a chat with us about it again in Hamburg. But he's just one of those just nice guys. You know, he's always got time for you. Whenever he sees you in the room, you know, he'll always come over and say hello. And it was kind of funny after his fight. We were recording the MMA Roadshow, myself, John Morgan, and Abby. And me and John couldn't see him. We had our back to him. And he came round a corner and he sort of waved over at Abby, and Abby winked at him. And
okay.
And he tried to wink back. But unfortunately, he tried to wink back with the eye that was just above the broken orbital bone that he'd sustained in the fight. And he suddenly realised, and then it was quite a comical moment, but he tried to wink back and he was like, shit, I can't do that. So, and the reason he had a broken orbital bone is that Peter Sobotta fought like a man possessed in that fight. I've seen him fight before. I've watched him on cards. I've been there and seen him fight. I think he fought over in Krakow last year when I was there. And he may have fought in Berlin too. But he put in an unbelievable performance. He decked Dalby with a straight right hand, which as Dalby told me after in the bar, that was the punch that broke his orbital, and that was in the first round. And then jumped on him and absolutely hammered him. And, a good few fighters would have been absolutely finished at that point. But Dalby is made of tougher stuff than that. Somehow survived the round. It was a clear 10-8 round, so he was up against it for the rest of the fight. Stayed in there and fought gamely, but Sobotta was just... like when you play like Street Fighter or something and you get a power-up. It was like Sobotta was on a power-up for the whole fight. He just had that little bit extra oomph in all of his punches, and on the floor he's got very, very good control once he gets to the mat. Excellent performance from him. The crowd loved it. Dalby took it on the chin and was very philosophical about it afterwards. He spoke to us in the bar and held his hands up and said, the other guy was better than me today. Well, what can you do? So looking forward to seeing both of those guys fight again. And then the featured prelim card was Jim Warhead, long-awaited UFC debut against Yesin Ayari, who is a German prospect who trains out of Peter Sobotta's gym. Really nice guy. Spoke to him on media day. Again, someone very articulate, excellent English, puts himself across very well. And was almost apologetic that he was fighting an English guy when I was talking to him. So it was kind of funny. But I think Jimmy Warhead got stitched up slightly because the judges gave it as a split decision to Ayari. 28-29, 29-28, and 30-27. Now, I scored this fight from Octagon side, and I gave it to Warhead by 30-27. I gave him all 3 rounds. Our buddy John Morgan was sat immediately next to me. He scored the fight 29-28 to Ayari. So that tells you how close the rounds were. because they were close rounds. Iari spent the whole fight backpedaling and counter-striking. Warhead was pushing the pace. To me, was landing the more decisive shots. And I thought Iari's best round was the last round. Also, Warhead dropped Iari in the first round and the last round. And one judge didn't give him a single round. So I think he got very harshly dealt with by the judges. Ben Cartledge, I believe, gave the fight to Warhead 29-28. So I think he got a little bit harshly dealt with. I think if the scores had all read 29-28, then you can say fair enough, it was a tough fight to score. But that 30-27 shouldn't be on that scorecard. That was ridiculous. So, you know, it was his UFC debut. Again, he was great to talk to during the week. And I bumped into him probably 2 or 3 times around and about the Fighter Hotel during the week. And he was always had a big smile on his face, really, really relishing the whole UFC Fight Week experience and looking forward to getting in there and competing. But I think he got slightly harshly dealt with. I think he should have had a win, but fingers crossed we see him back in there soon. You know, maybe that Belfast card will have a slot for him. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy Waller is 38 years old, so I thought him getting to the UFC at this stage was almost like Leonardo DiCaprio finally getting his Oscar after being nominated so many times. He's been close, but yeah, I don't think he should take take the loss too much, to heart too much, especially if folks like yourself in the media are openly kind of publicly stating your opinion that you scored the fight for him. I mean, aside from yourself, was there anybody else in the media that also scored it for Jim apart from yourself?
Most of my timeline was saying Warhead won the fight, and I think the MMA Decisions website, someone showed me a grab from that, and I think almost all the people on that had Warhead winning the fight. So it's one of those, you win some, lose some. When the rounds are close and when the styles involved are very, very different, sometimes you do get these strange sort of scoring discrepancies. So I don't think he should feel too bad about it. I know afterwards he was saying he was disappointed in his own performance. Iari was a very tricky customer. There's no doubt about that. But I thought Warhead dealt with him well enough to win the fight. So, fingers crossed we see him back in there soon. I certainly hope that this isn't his only appearance in the octagon. I think he's definitely worthy of another go. And as I say, I think that fight card in Belfast to me would be the obvious place to do it. So, fingers crossed he gets himself another fight as soon as. That was our preliminary card. So we've got the main card. You mentioned Nick Hine earlier. It was a pretty workmanlike performance from Sergeant Nick. It wasn't the spectacular performance I think he was hoping for against Tai Hyung Bang, who's a very durable guy and is more than happy to get involved in a slugfest. I think Nick was very wary not to get dragged into that, and did a very good job of outpointing him. He beat him 29-28, 30-28, 30-27. So, he wasn't in any real danger in that fight. Won it relatively comfortably. The interesting thing from Nick is he's now relocating to Los Angeles, and he's training. He's started training with Anthony Hardong, and so we can expect to see some improvements in his kickboxing game in particular moving forward. I think, and a win on home soil for him was an important one for him. But really, the fight card really kicked off with those last 3 fights. They really saved the card as a spectacle. Ryan Bailey... Even
just name value, those 3 fights are the ones that jumped out to me just leading up to this fight card in the first place. I mean, Ryan Bader, Ilir Latifi, Gustafsson, Blakovic, and Barnett Arlovski. Big names, marquee names, interesting guys, especially when you look at Gustafsson, Latifi, and I'm sure they brought a fair amount of Swedes with them to Hamburg. But yeah, I mean, those were the fights I was most looking forward to leading up to the actual card itself. And did they deliver?
Yeah, they did. I mean, your point about the Swedish fans, it's worth mentioning this, actually. The event was a sellout and it sold out quickly. But we were told, James Elliott told me in the week, 30% of all the tickets sold for that event were sold to addresses outside of Germany. And judging by the arena and the atmosphere in there, I reckon the vast majority of that 30% were from Sweden, because it was like a home game. when Latifi walked into the Rocky theme, as he likes to do. I still think he should walk out to Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel, but I don't think that. But there you go. I don't know. I mean, JDS uses the Rocky theme. Latifi should. He's a Sledgehammer. Walk out to Peter Gabriel. Anyway.
Simon, way too many fighters use the Rocky theme. Retire it already. I don't want to hear it anymore.
Well, I think there should be a rule. I think you should have only one fighter should be able to use that theme tune. Otherwise, what's the point, right? Have an individual identity. Anyway, Latifi walked out and got a huge pop from the crowd. Bader came out to a far superior walkout song, Painted Black by the Rolling Stones, and got booed almost out the building. So the Swedes were repping strong. You know, they turned up in their droves and really made some racket. That fan support counted for NAFOR when the fight started, obviously. So, you know, Latifi actually started really well.
Well, this is one of the fights I've actually seen.
Yeah.
I literally just watched it a couple of minutes before we jumped on the Skype machine, and yeah, I thought the first round Latifi did all right. You know, it was a pretty even first round. I thought Latifi had his moments, especially up against the cage and in the clinch, and you know he landed a few shots on Ryan, but Ryan, you know, also landed a few shots on Latifi, but it was all about that one moment in the second round, about 2 minutes in, and Latifi, I saw him doing it quite a bit in the first round, where he was kind of like almost crouching or ducking his head or like going low. Maybe perhaps he was doing that to, you know, avoid the takedowns from Ryan, and he did a pretty good job in the first round, or you know, with his takedown defense. But I think that might have been maybe even a setup, or maybe that's some sort of corner advice that Bader got from his cornerman. That look, Latifi is ducking his head. You may want to just throw a knee and see what happens. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, Latifi ducked down, maybe perhaps going for a takedown or just, you know, ducking down to kind of get a body shot in. And as soon as he did that, Ryan Bader just lifted his knee at the same time. His knee just landed flush on Latifi's chin. And the way Latifi, his body just flipped back, it's reminiscent of I don't know which pay-per-view card it was. It was Jose Aldo versus Chad Mendes, when Jose Aldo landed that knee and Mendes' body just spasmed backwards and landed, head rocking on the ground. That's exactly what it reminded me of. That's a brutal knockout, definitely the highlight knockout of the fight, and probably will be up there for the best knockouts of the month.
Absolutely, and I likened it to that very same knockout on the MMA Roadshow. I said it was just he didn't so much fall backwards as fly backwards. It was quite spectacular to watch. It was also a little worrying, obviously coming so close after the Michael Venom Page knockout. And just a very, very quick aside, Michael Venom Page was there all week this week.
Yes, with Judo Jimmy.
Yeah, and I had a chance to have a couple of quick chats with him, and it was kind of interesting. He was in Judo Jimmy's corner, so we had Bellator's Michael Venom Page standing there, fully bedecked in Reebok fight kit, and
wow,
and he kept his hood on for the whole thing, presumably to make him look less conspicuous. But if anything, it made him look more conspicuous, because who wears the hood on a Reebok hoodie? But there's just an interesting little side note. Yeah, Michael Page in full Reebok UFC gear, but yeah, that Latifi KO was as brutal as it was scary, as it was spectacular, and it was very encouraging and good to see Latifi when he eventually recovered, leave the octagon under his own steam and walk past us on press row, pretty much under his own steam. So
that's good to see.
Yeah, and a big win for Ryan Bader, who I think gets a bit of a bum deal in that UFC light heavyweight division. To think that he hasn't been given a chance yet. With the amount of people he's fought and the amount of people he's beat, surely that ladder's got to have a chance at some point. We can't just rotate these guys at the top and keep everybody out. Bader's the next. Bader's the next best guy.
Bader reminds me a lot of Bisping. He gets a couple of wins together, and then he gets a big marquee fight, and then that could potentially get him a title shot, and then he just doesn't clinch the deal. Like, I remember the Machida fight he had, which he lost. Then he won against Vladimir Madichenko. Then he lost against Glover Teixeira. Then he got this amazing 5-fight win streak right up until he came up against Anthony Johnson, and let's face it, outside of maybe Daniel Cormier and John Jones, Anthony Johnson's probably the third best light heavyweight in the world anyway. So yeah, I agree. It's good that Bader got back to winning ways, and obviously we're going to go to the next couple of results from the card, but perhaps a fight with Gustafsson might be on the card somewhere down the road, and maybe that's a nice segue for you to let me know and let the listeners know what you thought of Gustafsson's performance, because he beat Jan Blachowicz.
He did beat Jan Blachowicz, but he needed to change his game plan to do it. I spoke to Gustafsson in fight week, and he told me he was gonna put Blachowicz away quickly. He said but I think the phrase he used was a fast knockout. He said this is going to be a fast knockout, and the way he started that fight was as if he was going to get a fast knockout. He got straight in the pocket, stayed there, and threw leather. Unfortunately for Gustafsson, Blachowicz took everything Gustafsson threw and gave him a little bit more back. And Blachowicz absolutely rang Gustafsson's bell on more than one occasion. And we were watching the fight and talking about it from press row, saying Blachowicz looks good. He looks seriously good in the stand up, and he was winning the stand up exchanges, which would have surprised quite a few people. And it got to the stage where I think Gustafsson's corner just started hollering at their man, take him down, take him down. And eventually Gus took that advice, took him down. And at that point, the skills gap suddenly got much bigger. Gustafsson on top of Blachowicz on the mat was a completely different ball game. The Polish light heavyweight guy had nothing on the floor for Alex Gustafsson. He tried to wriggle his way out of position, tried to sweep, but Alex was just had more than enough control, and pretty much for 2 rounds. I think Blachowicz probably won the first round, or certainly came close to it. It was one of those. He almost nicked the first round. Gus probably got it, but Blachowicz certainly came close. Rounds 2 and 3, though, Gustafsson sort of went to his wrestling, took him to the mat, and ground out a 3-round decision in the end. So it wasn't the highlight reel return that I think he was hoping for. And
I think for Gustafsson, though, I think the most important thing was just to get back in the win column. I think it was the right decision from the UFC matchmakers to maybe get his competition pegged down a little bit, just slightly, in Jan Blachowicz. I think it was a good fight for him to take. It was not a main event. It wasn't a title fight. It wasn't in Sweden. So there was no external, real pressure. It was all about him having a good camp, getting in here in Hamburg, getting back to winning ways, and it just gives him something to build on now. Whether it's, depending on what happens with John Jones, whether it's a rematch with John Jones for the interim title, I mean, as much as I'd like to see that fight, because their first fight is one of my favorite fights, if not my favorite fight of all time. But I think it might be a good idea to perhaps keep building Gustafsson up. Maybe the Bader fight, maybe somebody else in the light heavyweight division. But if you're, Joe Silva before he leaves, and Sean Shelby, Simon, what would you do with Gustafsson next?
Well, if you're looking, to me, there are two fights that stand out, and neither of them are fights that you would say would build Gustafsson towards a title shot. They are, if you win them, you get one. One of them is Ryan Bader, and that would be my backup option. I would use Ryan Bader as my backup option. The fight that I would give Alexander Gustafsson next is John Jones. That's the fight I would give him next, because John Jones, we think, is going to receive a suspension, but we also think it won't be a particularly long one. We have just talking around our colleagues in the media and talking to a few people, the impression that I get is that there's going to be some sort of suspension here for John Jones, but it might well be along the 6 to 9 month line. Now, that being the case, I think that's perfect. Then you do Gustafsson versus Jones 2, with the winner taking on the winner of the Daniel Cormier Rumble Johnson fight, which has to happen next, in my opinion. So that's what I would do. If Jones is rendered unavailable for a longer period of time than that, then you go to Ryan Bader, and the winner of that gets the title shot next. So that's what I would do. I think there's a clear pathway there. Because
let me throw an idea your way, right?
Go on.
So UFC 200 took place on July 9th, right?
Yeah.
Now, if John Jones say he gets a 6-month suspension,
It'll be retroactive.
It'll be retroactive back to July 9th, which would mean he'd be eligible, if I'm not mistaken, and my math is right, he'd be eligible to fight on December 10th in Toronto at the Air Canada Centre. Can you imagine if that's what happens? He gets 6 months. The UFC put Gustafsson Jones 2 for the interim title back at the scene of the crime, so to speak, back at the same arena where they first fought. Wouldn't that be some sort of poetic justice in regards to the rematch? What do you think?
I think it sounds awesome. Awesome. And if you consider the fact that would probably be the co-main event.
Yeah, that would be a stellar co-main event, especially if the rumor mill is about GSP returning. You put him in the main event. That would be an amazing 1-2 combo for the UFC to kind of really give Canada and Toronto a stellar card with GSP's return and then Jones Gustafsson too. That would be amazing.
It really would. I'd love to see it. I think we're going to see a big end to the year in the UFC. They've got that big show in Toronto. Then they've got the end of year show in Vegas on December the 30th. I think they're going to... Plus, of course, you've got Madison Square Garden on November 12th. So I think we're going to see 3 stellar lineups for those three cards as the UFC really looks to stack the deck to round out 2016. And rounding out the main card in Hamburg, we had a battle of 2 former UFC heavyweight champions, Josh the War Master Barnett taking on Andrei the Pitbull Arlovski. This fight split the media right down the middle when we were picking our potential winners for this one. I'm going to go out there because sometimes you just got to blow your own trumpet. I predicted this. I predicted Josh Barnett submission 3rd round, and that's exactly what happened. I figured that he'd have to weather. I hope
you let Abby and John and everyone know that you got that right.
Too flipping right, I did. Yeah, it was on the MMA Junkie predictions, and almost as soon as Buffer had said 2 minutes 53 seconds of the 3rd round, I elbowed John and said, "I'll pick the 3rd round," and then just carried on. But yeah, so Josh Barnett, he had to weather an early storm from Arlovski. The first 60 seconds of that fight were just like rock'em sock'em robots. It was crazy. And they both dropped each other to within the first 30, 40 seconds of the fight. Just sort of, they both ended up having to take a knee and then jump back up in this wild exchange of strikes that they were throwing at each other. And then it gradually settled into some sort of pattern. And basically what happened, Barnett just used that old school catch wrestling, got the body lock on Arlovski, got him against the cage, wore him down, and just emptied that gas tank. And by the end of the 2nd round, Arlovski, he was gone. He was absolutely gone. He had nothing left in the tank. Barnett had just completely crushed it out of him. And then in that 3rd round, Arlovski... there was one moment, actually, it happened right in front of us. Barnett hit Arlovski with an uppercut. And when you're sitting this close to the octagon, this is the sort of thing you don't see when you're watching it on TV. He hit Arlovski with an uppercut, and Arlovski's eyes just completely rolled back in his head. He was out. Like a light. But it was for like a split second. And as his eyes rolled back, he took a half step back and then blinked, and his eyes were looking one way and the other. His eyes, one eye was looking at the door, the other eye was looking at the buffet. You know what I mean? They're all over the place. Yeah. And then it was like almost like a click of the fingers, and then he came flying forward and hit Barnett with like a 3-punch combo, and then he was back in the room again. It was nuts. So, but just after that, he caught Barnett in the eye with a thumb, and Barnett turned away and started walking away from him. And I thought, oh, blimey, this fight's over. Ref's going to stop this. This is almost like a verbal submission. Arlovski just chased him and started landing shots on him. And then somehow Barnett managed to turn around, recover, get Arlovski to the floor, soften him up a ground and pound, and his coach were hollering at him to just keep pushing the pace. They were saying, was it something like, put the pressure on and he'll quit, put the pressure on and he'll quit. And eventually Arlovski gave up his back, and in the end it was a very quick tap when Barnett put the rear naked choke in. So huge win for Barnett. Arlovski drops another defeat. He was very magnanimous afterwards, but obviously very disappointed. But it was a good way to finish the night. We had a lot of decisions, and not all of them were fantastic. Some of them were good, but we needed a little bit of a wow moment to really give the fans something to walk away with, and we had that with Ryan Bader. The Swedish fans went home happy with the Gustafsson win, and the Barnett Arlovski fight. Not the most polished fight you'd ever see in the world, but it had plenty of fun stuff to keep the crowd amused, and we had a submission finish from the War Master. So all things considered, it all finished on a high note.
Well, Ty, every time the UFC comes to Europe, whichever country it's in, we're always, one of the big questions in the post-fight press conference from the local media is, when are you coming back? When are you coming back to our country? And, the UFC's made a pretty big commitment over the last 3 or 4 years to Germany specifically. So what was James Elliott telling you and the rest of the media with regards to the success or what this event particularly meant for them, breaking further into the mainstream in Germany? And perhaps did you get a chance to speak to our friends over at Ground and Pound, who are the top local media in Germany with regards to how this event was taken by the German fans versus perhaps past events?
Yeah, I had a chat with Florian from Ground and Pound. We're just talking about the fights mainly, but the big thing about this event was it was a return to free-to-air TV. This was the first free-to-air TV fight for about 4 years, I think, under this new deal with ProSieben. And I know there's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes to actually achieve that and get the UFC back on free-to-air TV. I know some of the stigmas that we've had to fight against here in the UK are still very much present in Germany, and they're looking to break the barriers down there. So to actually get the event on free-to-air TV was a huge win for the UFC, and I'm sure they'll be back in Germany again in 2017. The crowd were excellent. The facilities were amazing. The arena was great. Everything about it, from a logistical point of view, went off without a hitch. And we had an event that the fans went wild for. They loved it. The actual fans in the building were very knowledgeable. Yeah, they booed some stuff, but they booed when stuff deserved to be booed.
Right.
And they were very appreciative of skilled moments in the octagon as well. So it was a really good experience actually being over there in Hamburg. The fans were great, the city was great, and fingers crossed. Well, put it like this: I don't think this will be the last time the UFC are in Hamburg. I think we'll see the UFC back in Germany again next year. Whether they return to Berlin or whether they go for Hamburg again remains to be seen. But I do think Germany is a big important market for them for sure.
Well, I guess what's exciting is that we're coming up to the final quarter of the year, and we still have a couple of events in Europe, and they're going to be a lot closer to our neck of the woods with regards to Manchester and Belfast. And I like, since the UFC's European office was created in London, and they've got this team, I'm just happy that there's been a certain level of consistency. Every year, in Europe, you're going to get 5, and if you're lucky, 6 events. And a lot of those events have been in markets that the UFC have steadily grown. They keep coming back year on year. So the local fans know that at least they can expect a UFC event either in their own backyard, in their country, like in England or in Ireland or in Germany, or somewhere that's fairly close by, where it's pretty easy to get to from all parts of Europe. Rotterdam comes to mind. Everyone in the UK knows how cheap it is from our point of view to kind of get to the Netherlands. You can drive there, you can fly there, you can get a ferry or a boat there if you want to. So it's all good. That's what we need. And now that we've got Bellator also making waves, they've had 2 events in Europe this year, one in Italy and one in London. It's just there's more events to cover, there's more exposure, there's more opportunities in the media, which is all positive from all concerns.
Absolutely, and I think what we're going to have, obviously the pinnacle of the sport, the really, really, really big fights are going to be more likely than not happening over in the US or with the occasional fight in Canada and with the occasional fight in Brazil, because it fits their time zone. Pay-per-view is such an important market for the UFC.
Of course,
it's very hard to break away from that. But they've experimented with shows over here in Europe. 204 is obviously an example of that, and it'll be interesting to see what the reaction is and how well ticket sales go. I think ticket sales will go very well. I think the tickets will go very quickly. They've been very competitively priced. I think the top price ticket's £200, which for a UFC show is almost unheard of. So that's certainly for a show of this scale. So fingers crossed there'll be a big response to that, and we do start to get one or two more of the larger shows. I mean, the Fight Nights are great fun. I thoroughly enjoy them. But the fans still want to see the big superstars, and to maybe be in a position to actually put on some of those big fights further out across the world rather than just in the US would be good to see. Now, that was UFC Fight Night Hamburg, all wrapped up. But of course, we've got another event coming up around the corner, which is obviously UFC 203 in Cleveland, Ohio, and we have got some big names on this card, Sandhu.
Yes, we do. And I think you mentioned it earlier, Si, the UFC have got some big cards coming up to finish the year strong. And I think it really kicks off with UFC 203. Who doesn't like a heavyweight title fight? We've got Stipe Miocic defending his championship for the very first time against Alistair Overeem. Overeem, who's been a Dream champion, Strikeforce champion, Pride champion. He wants this one championship with the UFC belt, just to kind of finish the collection. And that will be, a legacy that every fighter would dream of having. That headlines the card. And I think we spoke about this off air, but I think the three fights we really want to focus on and talk about, aside obviously with the main event in Miocic and Overeem, is, CM Punk, pro wrestler, making his professional mixed martial arts debut at the very top level in this game, for the biggest promotion, the UFC. He takes on Mickey Gall. And then for a local flavour for our British listeners, Scotland's Joanne Calderwood gets a main card fight against Jessica Andrade. I think Calderwood in the last couple of fights has really kind of turned her career around a little bit. She's being a little bit more smarter with her skill set. She's getting better as a fighter, and she's most importantly getting some wins under her belt now and getting a run put together, which is really important for her confidence. But let's start right at the top side. Stipe Miocic, Alistair Overeem. It's in Cleveland. It's what Miocic wanted. He wanted to defend his championship for the very first time, much like how Bisping is getting the opportunity to defend his championship in Manchester. But we don't see the heavyweight championship stick around these heavyweight fighters for too long. It is like the hot potato of the UFC. Do you think Miocic can get it done, or do you think we're going to get yet another brand new UFC heavyweight champion come Saturday night?
I think he's going to hang on to it. Now, I've got a lot of time for Alistair Overeem. I think he's going to go down as one of mixed martial arts' legends, because he's a guy who has lived through a number of eras of MMA and has competed on a number of different promotions and has been a superstar attraction across all of them and has been a champion. That one accolade that is missing from his career is the UFC heavyweight title, and he's now got an opportunity to win it. He's incredibly focused, and I think he's got all the skills to win it. But having said that, I just think Stipe is just a bit too tough, hits just a bit too hard, and I think if you stack up their skills against each other, I just think Miocic is superior in the key areas, which is wrestling, and when it comes to punch power and punch resistance. I think those three aspects are going to be effectively what decides this fight. I don't see Overeem knocking out Miocic with one shot. I can see Miocic knocking out Overeem with one shot. I don't see Overeem taking Miocic down and submitting him. I can see Miocic taking Overeem down and smashing him a ground and pound. So, weighing it up head to head, while Overeem is ridiculously skilled and has the ability to end fights, I just think Miocic is just a little bit too strong and will be able enough to keep the fight standing and I think he'll win the fight. I think he'll win it most likely by stoppage, because that's how these heavyweight title fights tend to finish. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Reem does it, and I'd obviously be happy for him if he does do it. He'd be the second British-born UFC champion, by the way, if he did it. And
technically yes, but he's as Dutch as they come.
Technically, he'd be the first UFC champion born on British, born within the borders of the United Kingdom, because Michael Bisping was born on a Cypriot air base, I think, if that's right.
Yeah.
So
that's how desperate we are to try and get as much local claimed UFC championship belts.
This is the Brit Pack you're listening to.
Yeah.
So, but that would be that is an unescapable, irrefutable fact. So I'm putting it out there. So I do hope if he wins, he flies the Union flag and proudly reps the country of his birth. But anyway, back to the plot. I think Miocic might just be a little bit too strong for him on this one. Two good guys who I've had the chance to chat to at various events, and two guys who, you as someone who's actually spoken to them, you sort of wish success upon them, because they come across really well, and they're good people to talk to. They've always got time for you. So whoever wins it, it'll be good for either one of them. But I think Miocic, I think this is his time right now, and I genuinely believe he is the best heavyweight fighter in the UFC. So I think this is the time for him to really cement that and defend that title. And the fight I want to see in 2017 for the title is Stipe versus Cain Velasquez. That's the fight I really want to see. I think that would be an absolute barn burner, and I think the winner of that will really be the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world.
Well, you definitely make a very compelling case and argument as to why Stipe Miocic could win, and it's one that's kind of hard to argue against. I have been kind of going back and forth on this, and I think I'm just 51% in favour of Overeem going into this week, and again, that might change come fight night. We'll see, how these guys talk and what they look like as the week kind of progresses in Cleveland. I've got a funny feeling that this is just Overeem's time. You talk about it being Miocic's time. I think for Overeem, when he came into the UFC, he was carrying a lot more muscle. He was, I think, relying a lot more on his pure striking ability. And what I've seen in his last 2, 3, 4 performances is a much more mature Overeem. I think the move over to Jackson Winklejohn has benefited him tremendously. I think he's more strategic. I think he's got more of a game plan. He sticks to the game plan a lot more than he perhaps used to. I think he saves a lot more in his gas tank. I think he doesn't kind of exert his entire energy in the first few minutes, perhaps like he used to in his earlier days. And I think if you are going to try and get the best type of matchup for Overeem, I know some people might think that his chin, might have gone with some of the losses he suffered via knockout. But I think people forget he comes from a K1, kickboxing background. He can strike with the best of them. And at the end of the day, these are 250, 260, and come probably fight night, 275, 280-pound men who are going to be swinging and trading leather like no business. So I think there's something in the air about not being able to get a victory over it in your own backyard. And I mean, Miocic beat Verdum in Brazil, so perhaps history will repeat itself, and Overeem can beat Miocic in his own back garden.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just slightly leaning towards Overeem. But like you, I wouldn't be surprised if Miocic won.
Yeah, and I've just gone on Overeem's Wikipedia page just to take a look at his fight record, and somebody very subtly has changed his place of birth. So
really?
Yeah, it now says that he was born in Liverpool, Merseyside.
Well, I can tell you right now, he wasn't. He was
born in Hounslow.
Sure. Hounslow, which is literally the town over from where I live.
Yeah.
Literally a stone's throw from where I live in West London.
So this is a little game for everybody out there to play, is to see in the coming week who is reporting that he's from Liverpool. And when you see that, you know that they do all their research on Wikipedia. So that'll be interesting to just to see who out there suddenly starts reporting over him as being a born and bred Scouser when he's actually from Hounslow. So yeah, just saw that and it made me grin. So I thought I'd drop that one in there. It's a fascinating heavyweight title fight. I think it's going to be a cracking fight. I think it might go a little way. While obviously the betting lines will always give you relatively short odds on a first round finish when it comes to a heavyweight fight. Both these guys are seasoned enough that I think we could see this go past the first round. And to be honest, the longer the fight goes, I think the better the chances for Overeem. So we'll see how that fight goes. We've got Fabricio Verdun versus Travis Brown as the co-main. Brown is stepping in to replace Ben Rothwell, who was due to have that fight. But the fight that we wanted to talk about, Sandhu, obviously is one that it's kind of divided the fan base. It's split the fan base. CM Punk versus Mickey Gall. He's in the UFC, CM Punk. He has no amateur mixed martial arts experience. He has no professional mixed martial arts experience. He has no amateur combat sport experience of any kind. No collegiate wrestling experience. And yet, here he is, in his late 30s, about to step into the octagon for the very first time on a UFC pay-per-view. Third fight from the top of the card against, from what we've seen, a lively and quite dangerous up-and-coming prospect who himself is still pretty raw and pretty green in terms of Mickey Gall. CM Punk, first off, I'm asking this question, but I know what you're going to say anyway. But for the benefit of the listeners, are you pro CM Punk in the UFC, or are you against CM Punk in the UFC?
That's a good question. I think 2 years ago, when the UFC signed CM Punk, it was the right call at that particular moment in time for the UFC. And I think people need to remember, because sometimes, we forget very easily. Back in 2014, the UFC wasn't having the best of years. There was fights falling out left, right, and center due to injuries. McGregor at the time hadn't really hit his stride yet. In terms of being a big pay-per-view draw. Ronda Rousey was just turning the corner, I believe, at the time of becoming a massive superstar. So there was a lot going on in the UFC. And at the time when they signed him, which was around November, I think it was, that's when the announcement was made, I believe, or late November, early December.
December 6th, 2014.
Right. It was all about trying to create some buzz and momentum as they headed into the new year, heading into 2015, with a uplifting the UFC fan base by saying, look, we've been here before with Brock Lesnar. We brought a massive WWE star over, and it worked once. Obviously, everyone is aware that he has no, combat sports background whatsoever. But again, just speaking from a promotional point of view, I think they needed to kind of try and bring somebody over that would initially just give a good injection of energy in terms of the outlook for the following year. And I think had CM Punk fought within the first year of being signed, he would have been able to carry the buzz and the momentum and the hype that his announcement first generated. Now that we're coming up to almost 2 years, and this was going to be one of my questions to you, Sai, I personally haven't really felt the buzz for CM Punk's involvement in this card. I thought I was involved in the media conference call before I headed off to Venice to last week. It was on Thursday night. And I thought that the exchange that Punk had with Gall in the conference call was interesting. I thought that CM Punk turned it up a notch. I'd say it was maybe a 7, but it certainly wasn't a 10 or 11 or a 12. You know what I mean? And again, we're recording this podcast on a Monday, and it remains to be seen what fight week gives us. And we saw with UFC 202, there wasn't too much buzz, or there wasn't as much buzz as people were expecting for the Diaz McGregor rematch, and then fight week happened, and all hell broke loose, and that changed the entire outlook for the anticipation for the fight itself. But going back to your initial question, before I ask you or get your take on the actual buzz for this particular fight, 2 years ago, I was definitely pro and for the UFC making the decision to have CM Punk. Now, 2 years later, I think that things have changed, and I'm not really looking forward to it. I'm actually worried to see what kind of performance and reaction CM Punk's going to get on Saturday night, because I think Mickey Gall's going to take make quite light work of him, to be honest with you, and I think the only kind of saving grace in this situation might be the fact that Mickey Gall is more of a grappler, jiu-jitsu practitioner type of fighter, rather than coming from a K1 kickboxing or some sort of striking background. Because at 38 years of age, I'm sure CM Punk, he's got a history of concussions with, doing what he did for the WWE. So I am actually genuinely worried and concerned for his health. Not to mention, obviously, what this means for perhaps the purists out there who just simply want to see the best fight the best. And when you think of the UFC, you ultimately think of best mixed martial artists in the world. CM Punk is not one of the best mixed martial artists in the world. He's got name value. He'll definitely, bring some eyeballs over from the pro wrestling community, which will definitely give the pay-per-view numbers a bit of a boost. How much of a boost compared to 2 years ago remains to be seen, but that's my take on it. But yeah, Sai, in terms of buzz, and then obviously giving your take in regards to what you think about CM Punk and whether this is the right or wrong call from the UFC, and whether you personally would like to see this happen again in the future. What's your take on everything?
My take on it is the UFC is the gold standard when it comes to multidiscipline combat sport. And CM Punk, if we're being brutally honest, has absolutely no business being on a main card of a UFC pay-per-view, because he's never fought. He's got no combat experience whatsoever. Now, what he is a name, and while I understand there is a certain amount of, there's this kind of a showbiz thing. There's, it's entertainment as well as sport, but the waters have been muddied significantly by this. What I would say is that I respect the hell out of CM Punk for doing or trying to do what he's trying to do. I think he personally is treating the sport itself with the respect it deserves. The way he's going about it is treating it with the respect that it deserves. Personally, if this fight was the featured fight pass prelim, I think that would make a whole load of sense. He wants to give it a go. Stick him in a featured fight pass prelim spot. I think that makes a lot more sense. The fact he's on the main card of a pay-per-view, it's a bit of a cash grab from the UFC. And
then again, Si, we don't really know the terms of the deal. That might have been something that CM Punk asked for, knowing how much of a draw he is in the pay-per-view market. So that may have been something that he said, say, listen, if I'm fighting for you guys, I want to have a slot on a main card where I can cash in on pay-per-view points.
I don't doubt it. But what I'm saying is, if we're being real about it, if we're going to even say that CM Punk deserves a go in the UFC at all, and a large number of people would say he doesn't.
Sure.
If we accept the fact that he's here, then if it were me, I would want him in that featured Fight Pass spot, because that then helps drive customers to Fight Pass, gets more people to sign up. The other benefit of that is all the WWE fans who want to watch will then have to get Fight Pass. They're very familiar with the whole business model of something like Fight Pass because they're familiar with the WWE network. And they're far more likely to hang around and check out what's what on there. And I think that makes a lot of sense. In terms of the fight itself, how can you even pick this fight? I mean, one guy's fought before, and we've watched it. One guy's never fought. We've watched CM Punk in the documentary series that's currently being aired in the States, and you can watch it on Fight Pass, and on YouTube as well. It's called The Evolution of Punk. If you haven't watched it yet, please do check it out. It's a very interesting, very well put together show. But what we've seen, CM Punk does not look like a fighter at all. And watching him in those sparring sessions, he doesn't look like a fighter at all. When I say he doesn't look like a fighter, he doesn't look like a professional fighter. He doesn't look like he knows how to throw a punch properly. And he certainly doesn't look like he knows how to stop himself from getting hit. So those two things are a sizable concern. But those clips that I saw were also from very early in his training camp with Duke Rufus. So you'd like to think he'll have improved a lot. I'm really looking forward to seeing the open workouts this week, and I hope they have them. I hope they.
That will be telling. That will be very telling.
Yeah, I hope they put him on them, and I want to see him. I want to see him in the open workouts more than any other fighter. I think he's someone who we can read a bit more into it. So we'll see how that goes. But asking me right now who's going to win, Mickey Gall's going to win that fight. But unless CM Punk looks like an absolute world beater in the open workouts, I don't see why we wouldn't think anything but that. So
talking about Wikipedia pages, you spoke about Alistair Overeem's Wikipedia page. You'd have to think that CM Punk's Wikipedia page is probably one of the most viewed ever, and he's fighting a guy in Mickey Gall that doesn't even have a Wikipedia page.
Yeah. Well, hopefully he'll have one after this fight. So. But yeah, so I'm interested to see how that one goes, and also I'm interested to see how they promote CM Punk's second fight, if indeed there is one, if he gets his backside handed to him by Mickey Gall.
Yeah, I mean, I think regardless of what happens, I think CM Punk's gonna fight one more time at least after this fight. I think if he loses, okay, fine, fair enough. He can work on something. I think the initial plan was always to try and get CM Punk to fight in Chicago. I'd imagine that that would have been a major part of the conversation. He's obviously from Chicago, and some of the most raucous and wild crowds he ever drew whilst working for the WWE was in Chicago. So win or lose, I think we'll see him fight one more time, and I think that'll probably be an event further down the line, in Chicago. But listen, if he wins, that they may give him the confidence to try and maybe get 1, 2, or 3 more fights. But I think right now we've got to just assess how things go on Saturday night, baby steps, see what the reaction is from the crowd, from the fan base, from the media, what kind of performance he gives, and ultimately, if he comes away unscathed or with injuries. And obviously that's been a major part of his journey, just getting to this point to actually fight on Saturday night. It's been injury laden, all sorts of injuries. So we'll see how his body holds together, and then we'll see what the future holds for him. But someone else that's had and continues to grow a really good fan base, but has just come back from a little bit of a bump in the road with a loss in the middle of 2015 is Joanne Calderwood, Scotland's own Jojo Calderwood. She's come back from that loss against Marina Moroz, and she got a couple of wins strung together versus Courtney Casey and Valu Letourneau. And this has coincided with some of the time she spent at the TriStar gym in Montreal, Quebec, and she's been there with a few other European fighters, and it seems to have done the trick. I think in her last couple of performances, she's been a lot more mature, and she's got a tough fight, and it's part of the main card offering on Saturday night at UFC 203. She's fighting Jessica Andrade, who's, been winning one, losing one, winning one, losing one. So she's also had an up and down experience in the UFC. But I think, Joanne's been quite outspoken this year a little bit. I remember seeing a post last month where she wasn't able to check in her luggage. And, I think she kind of threw a bit of shade towards the UFC for not booking her a flight, which included checked in luggage, so she had to pay for that out of her own pocket. But, that aside, Joanne Calderwood, I think, is getting better as she moves forward. And I think this will be a good test to find out exactly where she's at. I'm expecting her to win, which will make it, three in a row. In a division that, constantly needs, contenders for champion Joanna Jędrzejczyk. But hopefully this will be something that she can build on. And maybe by the time she is ready for a title fight, if it's not versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk, then who knows? Maybe it's for the inaugural flyweight title if the UFC, actually, brings that division and builds that within its offering. But what do you think, Si? Joanne Calder looking good for you lately?
Yeah, she looked outstanding in that fight against Valerie Letourneau. That was at 125 pounds, as you say, and she looked really, really good in that fight. Letourneau, I think the 125 pound division is perfect for her, and I think it will be perfect for JoJo as well. And I think there's probably a few fighters in both the existing women's divisions, the 115 and the 135, who would settle at 125 and be quite happy there. And I think Joanne's one of them. She put in a really, really good performance. Definitely the best performance of her UFC career. Following up, of course, on probably the next best performance of her UFC career, which was against Courtney Casey in Glasgow last year. Interested to see how this fight goes, though, because Jessica Andrade is dangerous. She's dangerous. She's like a little pit bull. She's very, very powerful. And her win over Jessica Penne was her debut at 115 pounds, and she absolutely destroyed Jessica Penne, lit her up in that fight. Looked very, very good indeed at UFC 199. I was there at that fight, and I remember we were all wincing at octagon side at some of those shots that she was landing. So I don't think that JoJo Calderwood is going to have this all her own way. She's going to have to weather a storm. But if she can give as good as she gets, particularly through the first round, I can see Andrade's pace beginning to drop as the fight goes on. And that's where I think if JoJo can hang around and stay in the fight, then I think she'll take over in the second and third rounds. It's that first round. I'm expecting a lot of action in that first round. So I think as long as JoJo steps in there knowing that she's gonna have to face a storm in that first 5 minutes, and she's prepared for that, I think she's got what it takes to go on and win that fight. But there's always the danger against someone like Andrade that you can get overwhelmed early on. So I'm really looking forward to the fight. I think it's going to be one of the most exciting fights of the night, because both those girls love to stand and throw leather, and Jo Calderwood certainly isn't one for taking a backward step in her fights. She actually thrives when the fights get really tough. So I think this could be the making of her. If she can get through this fight, I think people will start talking about her as a bona fide contender for that 115 pound title, and it would be great news for the UK and certainly for Scotland if they got themselves a world title challenger. Imagine that, Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Joanne Calderwood in Glasgow. Could you imagine that?
That would be pretty fantastic, especially with how I don't know why, but it seems this year more than any other year, the UFC have been a lot more friendly with regards to, a lot more giving, should I say, with regards to allowing fighters to kind of get more hometown fights. You see it with Bisping, you saw it with Verdum in Brazil, you're seeing it with Miocic in Cleveland. So yeah, absolutely. If Joanne Calderwood can get through this fight, who knows? Maybe even another cheeky fight on the Belfast card to round out the year. I think the momentum is being built. She's rounding out her skill set as a fighter, getting better as she gets further into her mixed martial arts career. Obviously, coming from a kickboxing background, Thai fighting background. There was always going to be an adjustment period, but I think she's finally finding her feet in mixed martial arts, and I think the best of her is yet to come.
Totally agree. Before we move on to our listeners' questions, I do just want to very quickly mention one other fight that's on that main card, and probably the one fight I'm looking forward to the most, and that's the bantamweight scrap between Uriah Faber and Jimmy Rivera. Faber has been in and around this sport forever. He's the father figure of the bantamweight division, former WEC featherweight champion, of course. He's taken on Jimmy Rivera, who I believe is going to be a future world championship contender in that division. And I have a feeling we might see the torch passed on that in that fight. I think Jimmy Rivera is on the verge of scoring the biggest win of his mixed martial arts career. Trains out of Tiger Shulman's in New York. Top guy. He was in The Ultimate Fighter a couple of years ago. Thought his chance had gone, and then got called up. I remember that he told me the story about when he got called up. He was teaching a class full of kids. He teaches martial arts classes at that gym in New York. and it was his birthday, and he was teaching a kids class, and his family came in along with his manager and broke the news to him in front of all the kids that he'd just been signed to fight for the UFC, and he hasn't looked back since. He's been in outstanding form throughout his UFC career. He's got himself a fight with Uriah Faber, and I see him doing it. I mean, he's got probably, and I don't know this officially, but he must have one of the longest active winning streaks in the UFC. We're talking 18 fights, 17 fight win streak. He's 19-1. It's an 18 fight win streak. He's 19-1, and he hasn't lost since his second pro fight back in 2008. And he looks a real talent in that 135-pound division. I'm really looking forward to seeing that fight.
Yeah, and like you said, Si, he's got this amazing win streak, but he needs a name. And getting a win over Uriah Faber definitely gets him that big name victory. Faber's obviously coming off the trilogy fight with Dominic Cruz, but I'll give Faber a lot of credit. I mean, accepting a fight like this, if he gets a win over Rivera, that still keeps him in the mix. So it's just crazy to even say that at his age. But if he can keep winning fights, he gets a title fight, he loses, and then next thing you know, he's got 3 or 4, really stellar wins put together over some really good fighters, top 5, top 10 fighters. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I do agree. I think with this could be the passing of the torch moment, so to speak. But listen, Faber's no joke. He's pretty much only been bested by the likes of Dominic Cruz, Jose Aldo, really some of the best fighters the sport's ever produced, especially the lighter weight classes. So who knows? Maybe a win over Rivera might set up the TJ Dillashaw fight. To be honest with you, I think win or lose, I think the TJ Dillashaw fight is going to happen sooner or later. I think that there's too much money on the table given their history and their rivalry and the beef between them for them not to do that fight. But for Rivera, yeah, I remember getting a chance to kind of cover his fight week, in Glasgow last year, and he was a good interview. And like you said, his record is impeccable. He looks better and better every time he comes out. And this will be a big moment, massive stage. It's a main card of a UFC pay-per-view. It's the very first UFC pay-per-view he's been a part of. And to get a victory over Uriah Faber will definitely be putting a statement on the division.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to seeing that fight. And on the topic of Uriah Faber, and as I say, this is the Brit Pack. One day, before both these guys hang up their gloves, please somebody book Uriah Faber versus Brad Pickett. I would love to watch that fight. That would be I think, an absolute barn burner of a fight for either or both of those guys to see out their career. Maybe in 2017. Maybe if the UFC comes to London in 2017, that would just be an outstanding fight. If I was matchmaking that card, and who knows, maybe I'll do a little video blog at some point and sort of try and do that. I did it last time. So maybe I'll do that, but I'll tell you now, that'll be one of the fights on my card. I'd love to see that match up one day.
Maybe put your request into Joe Silva before he calls it a day and rides off into the sunset at the end of the year.
Yeah, and that's a guy who deserves the the best send off possible. It's been covered extensively everywhere else, but of all of the people on the UFC staff, there's going to be people that are missed when they leave. Few people will be missed as much as Joe Silva is missed, and he might not be the most publicly recognisable figure, but people within the sport know just how influential this guy's been, and he's been there from the very beginning almost. And he's decided to take his retirement, and all the very best to him. I mean, one of the reasons why the UFC is as big as it is because of him, because he's the guy who's making the fights, and whoever they choose to replace him, I suspect it'll be a number of people. They've got a big set of shoes to fill, so all the best to him in his retirement.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't going to cover it because it wasn't on the schedule, but since you brought it up, I've got a nice idea in regards to what they could potentially do with the matchmaking situation. I'm going to throw it out there, maybe get your take on this side, but I was thinking perhaps let Sean Shelby just take over the entire men's roster, let go of the women's roster. You bring over Julie Kedzie, who's the matchmaker for Invicta. Obviously, her job is to know all the up-and-coming female fighters out there in various weight classes. She knows the women better than anyone else, probably. and maybe perhaps let her almost have a dual role where I don't know if there's a conflict of interest there at all, but being a matchmaker for Invicta and the UFC, but there's clearly a relationship between the two promotions. Maybe bring over Julie Kedzie, let her look after the female weight classes in the UFC as well as her role for Invicta, and that might be the best way of moving forward without rocking the boat too much with a completely fresh face to maybe perhaps look after the men's divisions. I mean, again, matchmakers aren't growing on trees left, right, and center, and it's hard to get the experience and the relationship with fighters and managers and agents and so forth. But just from the top of your head, really quickly, Si, because I know we weren't going to really talk about this too much in depth, but if you're the UFC with Joe Silva leaving, what would be the best move to kind of sort out the matchmaking situation at the moment?
I think you put together a matchmaking committee. I think you have, obviously you'd have Sean Shelby in there. You'd have Dana White on that panel as well, and I think you get some senior retired fighters on there, guys who know the sport. Guys who've moved into the analysis world. Your Brian Stans, your Dan Hardys, people like that. Kenny Florian maybe. The people whose job is now to watch and assess these guys. I would get those guys involved, and maybe Sean Shelby becomes the sort of the director, the overseer of that committee, if you like. But then I think, to be honest, I think you need to have a group of people doing it, and then it covers all bases. And I think that makes the most sense, and it also takes the focus off any one person, because it's such a high pressure job to do. And unless you've got someone who is clearly the number one guy in the world at it, and they want to do it, then it's a hard thing to do. So the best thing to do is just have this think tank of some of the best minds within the sport, people who've got practical experience, not only fighting, but also watching and analysing fights, and also someone who's experienced in sort of dealing with all of that sort of thing. So that's what I would do. It'd be interesting to see what they do. But I'm sure it'll get sorted out sooner rather than later.
Well, speaking of the unknown, we have some unknown questions, and they want answers, Si.
That was very slick, by the way.
I appreciate that. We've had a lot of our listeners tweet us, and me and Simon really, guys, greatly appreciate it. You don't have to tweet us on the day that we record the podcast. If you want to tweet us throughout the week, if something comes to mind, drop us a tweet. I'll give it a like from our Brit Pack MMA Twitter handle, so it's kind of on our agenda to discuss on the show. So here we go. We're going to start with some questions now, and the first one comes in from Lou Blackman, who says, is the co-main for UFC 204 set as Belfort versus Mousasi? So we're about a month away, Si, and as far as I can tell, I think that is going to be our co-main, unless the UFC throw a curveball and announce another big fight that can take the status of a co-main event, so to speak. But what do you think? Is that set from what you're hearing, Si, Belfort Mousasi co-main event?
I think that's the most likely thing. I think what they tend to do, they announce the main event and then they announce other fights, and they only ever confirm, or in most cases, they only tend to confirm the co-main event once the card is set. So it allows them a bit of breathing room. Another fight might become available that they weren't expecting, or people might drop off the card. So they're certainly looking at the list of fights we have now. That is the obvious co-main event, and I know. I think the common consensus is that will be the co-main event. If the UFC suddenly produce another fight that trumps Mousasi versus Belfort, then happy days, right? We're going to get another great fight on the card. But I do think we're probably going to get at least one more added to that card, but I would assume it would be not a co-main event fight. I think it might be something a bit lower down, but I think that's probably going to be a co-main event. But we never know until they say this is our confirmed lineup. It's still up in the air, but right now I'd say yeah, that's our co-main event.
Bobby Coyce tweets in and says, what is your realistic bet for the UFC 205 main event, and who do you expect on the card? Well, I think we could spend an entire show discussing which kind of fights we could put on the main card, at least for New York. But let's stick to the first part of the question, Si. UFC 205 main event. My bet is on Conor McGregor fighting Eddie Alvarez for the lightweight championship. Champion versus champion, Madison Square Garden. I think that makes all the sense in the world. You've got the Irish contingent, not just from Ireland, but also from the New York area itself. Eddie Alvarez and his whole team and camp of Italians, and the Frankie Edgar fan base, which is basically an Eddie Alvarez fan base as well, will be in their droves in New York. Even though Eddie Alvarez is from Philadelphia, it's not far from New York at all. But I think a champion versus champion main event is the right way to go for your very first UFC main event in Madison Square Garden. Am I right, Si? Am I wrong?
No, you're right. You're right. That would be my pick. It was my pick immediately after UFC 202. The only other one that I can see jumping in there and potentially taking over from that, if there are any issues that mean that McGregor can't fight on that card, the obvious fight to have at the top of that card in place of that would be Daniel Cormier versus Anthony Rumble Johnson. But I have a feeling they're going to do that in Toronto. So that's that. I'm basically on the same page as you. I think Conor versus, or Eddie Alvarez versus Conor McGregor is the fight to make, and I really do hope that fight gets done.
We've got our first British champion, Simon, in the UFC, in Michael the Count Bisping. Hogan tweets in and says, who will be the second British UFC champion? I'll throw that to you first, Si.
Well, you never know. It could be Alistair Overeem. He fights Stipe Miocic at UFC 203. That's a very good question. And I think, the honest answer is we just don't know. We've got I think we're going to have a bit of a wait until we get another one. Looking at the developmental path of our British talent, we've got some guys who've been in the UFC a while, and they aren't quite at world championship level, and we've got a young crop coming up. People like Arnold Allen. We'll learn a lot more about him when he takes on Mirsad Bektic. If he gets past Mirsad Bektic, I think it'll be time to start getting very excited about him. We've got Mark Diakiese, who has just joined the UFC. We don't know what the ceiling is for him yet. Certainly very, very exciting, but jumping in the shark tank that is 155 pounds, he's got some choppy water to negotiate before he even hits the top 10, let alone starts being talked about as a championship contender. So it's really tough to see. I'll be honest with you, as things stand right now, it's almost impossible to say. Tom Breeze, obviously someone who we've earmarked as a potential threat at 170 pounds. He's had to go back to the drawing board a little bit, so it'll be interesting to see how he bounces back from that loss to Sean Strickland. It really is wide open. Right now, if you want to be a little bit cheeky and you want to be a little bit off the wall, then here's an answer for you. Michael Venom Page will be the next British UFC champion. There you go. I'll leave that one with you.
I like where your head is at. I think I always thought that Joanne Calderwood, when I first saw her fight, had what it took to kind of get to championship level. I think she's well on her way, especially after her last couple of performances. Now, whether that in the next year to 18 months to maybe 2 years, the UFC introduces a flyweight female division, I think you'll have to, as long as Joanne obviously keeps winning, you'd like to think that they'd put her in the inaugural kind of title fight against somebody else that can either drop down from bantamweight or pop up from strawweight. But who knows? If you can get a couple of more wins together at the strawweight division, then Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Joanne Calderwood, or whoever is champion, I'm sure Marina Moroz will have something to say about that at the time. But I think even with any mixture of the two, with Joanne Calderwood versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk or Marina Moroz, sorry, not Marina Moroz, I meant to say Karolina Kowalkiewicz, what you've got there are three girls who come from a very disciplined Thai fighting background, and I think they'll fancy themselves getting the better of the fighting exchange on their feet. So, but yeah, I mean, if you're going to put a gun to my head, I'll pick Joanne Calderwood. And speaking of the women's division, I think this is a pretty good account to follow. Actually, it's the WMMA World _UK Twitter account, which is basically it's a women's MMA dedicated Twitter account. and they've tweeted in and asked us, when will the UFC introduce the featherweight division? It doesn't make sense for Chris Cyborg to make 140. We've spoken about this before, Si. It's good that the UFC is utilizing Chris Cyborg for their events. She's definitely a draw. That's a proven fact at this stage. But it's horrible to make her continue to cut to 140. There was that video that was released recently from an upcoming documentary, a teaser trailer, so to speak, which just showed how much of a hard cut that was, and she was literally in tears. And you don't want to see that, especially with fighter safety being such a hot topic, and the UFC basically adopting the early weigh-ins now globally from the athletic state commissions over in the US. But yeah, I mean, I really hope that the UFC sooner or later just create a women's division for Cyborg. Create 145. You've got a dominant champion you can use as a draw. Put her on top of pay-per-view cards and cash in the money. It just doesn't make any sense for them to keep using her at 140. Am I right or am I wrong?
You're right, but what I would say is I don't think we're going to see it for a while. I think we're more likely to see a 125-pound division first. I think that, from a business point of view, to me makes a lot more sense. Now, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't hold featherweight fights. I think if Cyborg is in the UFC and Cyborg clearly can't healthily make 135 pounds, she shouldn't be made to make 135 pounds. She will just have to basically do what Conor McGregor has been doing for the past year and take money fights. Have people come up to her weight and fight her. Providing they can find people to fight her at 145, or if she can fight healthily at 140, have a fight Holly Holm, have a fight Jermaine Durandamy, have a fight these people, but have them as a showcase rather than, she doesn't have to sit within a championship structure. The UFC have signed CM Punk and stuck him in at welterweight. He's not going to even come within a million miles of the welterweight top 15, but they're still putting his fights on the main card of a pay-per-view. Why are they doing that? Because the fans are going to want to watch it. And the fans are going to want to watch Chris Cyborg fight. She's probably one of the top 5 or top 10 biggest stars in the UFC. It makes no sense for them to not allow her to actually fight at a healthy weight. Now, if that doesn't fit within their usual weight categories, then who cares, right? Just find out what weight she can safely fight at and put her in fights at that weight class and make it happen. And then over time, eventually they'll hopefully bring in 145 pounds. But it's something that's going to take a bit of time. I think, as I say, we're going to see 125 pounds introduced to the UFC before 145. I just think that makes a bit more sense. And from what I understand, I don't think we're going to see 125 pounds for a little while either. I think probably we might have to wait until next summer or beyond before we even see that. So I wouldn't be holding her breath on a 145 pound division, but I do think she should be allowed to fight at 145 pounds, if that makes sense.
It does, certainly. Daryl Chumbly tweets in, given the state of the light heavyweight division, is a mini tournament a viable choice with Rumble, John Jones, Bader, and Gustafsson to decide a title shot? I don't think so. I mean, the middleweight division definitely has the right criteria and the available fighters for a middleweight tournament, so to speak, with Rockhold, Jacare, Romero, and Weidman. But I think with light heavyweight, let Rumble and let John Jones, DC, have their fight. And then you have John Jones obviously waiting to find out what happens with the situation. And then if he's available to fight in the next 6 months, I think you make the Gustafsson fight in Toronto. If he's going to get a lengthier suspension, whether it's 9 months, whether it's a year, then I think you put Gus in there with Bader. What do you think, Si?
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about it earlier on in the show, didn't we? And
yeah,
I think that is exactly what you do. I mean, it isn't a tournament in the truest sense, but at the end of the day, you win fights, you move forward, and in that, I think if John Jones isn't going to be in a title fight, and in my opinion, he doesn't deserve to be in a title fight right now, Anthony Johnson deserves it more. I think you do the Johnson-Cormier fight. If Jones is available within a reasonable time frame, then you do him versus the next guy, and the next guy is it's either Ryan Bader or Alexander Gustafsson. I would give it to Gustafsson, and if Jones isn't available, then Bader's next. I said earlier that Bader's been harshly dealt with, and I'm dealing with him harshly again. So apologies, Ryan, if you're listening. But he deserves. I think he deserves a go. I think Alexander Gustafsson versus Jones is an obvious fight to make, and I think it would be almost negligent if the fight didn't get made if Jones was available. I think that fight absolutely has to be made, and putting it on in Toronto, as you pointed out, is such a no-brainer of a decision. I would be absolutely shocked if that fight wasn't made for Toronto, if indeed Jones is available for it.
MMA Goldfish tweets in and says, why in the last 20 years have there been so few heavyweight contenders come through the ranks? That's a bit of a head scratcher. I mean, I think for a long time, Si, we saw, I think through The Ultimate Fighter and some other outlets, we saw a lot of, especially on the American side, a lot of ex-NFL players and other, big men from other sports backgrounds come in, and try their hand at MMA. And I think now we're getting, guys that are actually training MMA from day one. Looking at their physique and seeing what they can do. But that's a bit of a tricky one. I mean, I think if you look at the top 10 or the top 15 of the UFC's heavyweight division, I mean, I'm looking at the heavyweight rankings right now. Verdum, Velasquez, Overeem, JDS, Ben Rothwell, Arlovski, Brown, Mark Hunt, Josh Barnett, and Derek Lewis. That's the top 10. And out of the top 10, you can only probably say that Derek Lewis is the one in the last, I'd say, year to 18 months, with his performances and his excellent social media performances, has really kind of like made some noise and broken through as an up-and-coming contender. But, I mean, what do you think? Are there 20, 25, 28, 20, 29-year-old guys out there in the heavyweight division, do you think, that are making some noise and can make their way to the UFC? Or what is the unknown ingredient as to why we don't see upcoming fighters at a younger age in the heavyweight division come through?
I think you have to sort of step back and look wider within the realm of combat sport. Look at heavyweight boxing. There aren't that many outstanding sort of elite level athletes in top level heavyweight boxing anymore. So, there's been a real malaise when it comes to heavyweight boxing. We obviously had the golden era of sort of Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier and Ken Norton and people like this. And then we had the Mike Tyson era, and he was beating some good guys at the top back then. And it's kind of, Lennox Lewis we had for a while. And, we had the Klitschko's who were both elite level guys, but they're basically beating very average opposition. And we have seen a lack of heavyweight talent in boxing and in MMA. The guys, as you say, at the top of that division, the guys that have been there and have been around for a while. I do think what we're going to start to see is an increase in wrestlers coming across, like heavyweight wrestlers. I think the UFC have signed one or two Russian or Eastern European Olympic level wrestlers, and I think they're going to be coming across to the UFC soon. And I think we might start to see a few more of those. Someone who I'm interested in seeing his career progression is Chai Lewis Parry. Again, British name. Yep. on the Brit Pack. Big, strong kickboxer with legitimate one-punch knockout power. But this isn't one-punch knockout power with 4-ounce gloves on. This is one-punch knockout power with those great, big, heavy, glory kickboxing gloves on. And I know he's training over at AKA, or he has been training over at AKA with Daniel Cormier, Luke Rockhold, and Cain Velasquez. And I think he's considering it. And if he ever does eventually decide to take the plunge and join whether it be Bellator or whether it be the UFC, in many respects Bellator might be a better fit for him, because it allows him to still kickbox if he wants to under the Bellator kickboxing brand. But if he wants to go all in on MMA and he finds himself in the UFC, then that's a real talent we can get behind, and something I'd love to see in the years to come.
I actually spoke to Chai Lewis Parry in the build-up to UFC 200, because obviously he was a part of the Daniel Cormier camp in preparation for John Jones, and there was a lot of back and forth between Chai Lewis Parry and John Jones in the build-up to that particular fight as well. He's fighting for Glory, and he's a part of their Super Fight series, which is airing on UFC Fight Pass. And he tells me that his kind of overall game plan for the next 12 months is to maybe get 2 or 3 more fights for Glory, and then he wants to sign for the UFC. And he even went as far as to tell me that there's been some dialogue there with the UFC to kind of make that transition over. So I would be surprised if in 2017 you see Chai Lewis Perry become the latest addition to the UFC heavyweight roster. If that happens, that will be fantastic, especially for the Brit Pack.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And very, very quick aside, you mentioned Chai Lewis Perry at UFC 200. He watched that Daniel Cormier fight, sat and right next to me on press row. Security tried to remove him from octagon side because he didn't have anywhere to sit. And I had a spare seat next to me on press row, so I shouted over to him and said, "I've got a spare seat, come sit here." So I had a direct commentary of everything that was going on as Chai was bellowing instructions to DC from press row. It was kind of funny. But yeah, he's and also he's a big character as well. People will love him in the UFC, no doubt about it.
Gi Jitsu tweets in and says, "Hi guys, who would win in a Nando's eating contest, Sai or Sandhu?" Now,
let me jump in. This is a non-question. This is a non-question. This is like who wins, Frankie Edgar or Cain Velasquez, right? I don't stand a chance. I don't stand a chance. For the people listening, the way Sandhu just arranges his plate at Nando's is a sight to behold. Just the sauce. It's words cannot quite explain it. One day I will video it and put it on Twitter, and then you'll all be amazed not only at how he eats his Nando's, but what it must do to his insides is it doesn't bear thinking about. It really doesn't. Nando's wins by first round knockout. Oh, sorry. Sandhu wins by first round knockout at Nando's.
Nando's is like my gummy berry juice for some of our elder listeners who may have watched the Gummy Bears growing up in the 80s. But what this question did remind me of is we had a question, I think it was last episode, about Nando's versus Buffalo Wild Wings. And I know that you guys discussed it on the MMA Roadshow. It may have come up.
We did.
And I think I wanted to just kind of clarify my stance on things, because I think the question last time, and obviously you can tell we're getting now to the really important question on this week's show.
The burning issues, yeah.
Yeah, the burning issues. The question last week was, what's better, Buffalo Wild Wings or Nando's? And I said Nando's, and you said Buffalo Wild Wings. And I didn't get a chance to rebuttal that. And essentially what I wanted to say was this. I thought the question was in reference to the actual food. Now, if it's talking about a plate versus plate, I think Nando's wipes the floor with anything that Buffalo Wild Wing has to offer on their menu. But with regards to actual atmosphere, being in an environment with TV screens all around you and all sorts of beer on tap, then yes, I definitely agree with you and John Morgan. Buffalo Wild Wings is the place to be. But I think this was going to be an ongoing conversation, and perhaps we can pick this up again in Manchester when the three of us are going to be
at Nando's.
And perhaps we can debate this further. But yeah, who would win in a Nando's eating contest? Listen, put a full platter in front of me, and I'll clean it up in 10 minutes. I inhale my food. I'm a very fast eater. So yeah. But that does segue into our last question of the week, and that is, could we see Simon, both Hendo and Bisping retire after UFC 204 if Hendo wins? And that comes from Keith Boyston. I'll throw that to you first of all. So what do you think? If Hendo wins, do we see both him walk off into the sunset and Michael Bisping hang up his gloves?
That's an outstanding question. I hadn't considered that possibility. It could happen, I suppose. I spoke to Bisping in Vegas ahead of his press conference with Hendo at UFC 202, and I asked him what the end game was for him, and he said he wants to make 3 title defences and then hang his gloves up. So he wants Henderson as number 1, probably Rockhold or Weidman's number 2, and then whoever's top at the time as number 3. So Jacare or whoever. So that's his mindset. So retirement is in his head. He knows he's sort of looking towards that. If he were to lose, would that change? quite possibly, because if he loses, and certainly if he's going to lose to Hendo, he's not going to lose a decision. Let's be honest. I don't see any scenario where he loses a decision to Dan Henderson. So if he loses to Henderson, he's going to lose by knockout. That's the only that for me is the only scenario you can realistically cook up in your brain for Dan Henderson to win that fight, and that's by knockout. So if he loses by knockout to Dan Henderson, he will not be getting an immediate title shot back. That then means that he's at least 2 fights from realistically holding the UFC title again. Probably more because of the state of the division and the fact there's so many title contenders knocking around. So quite possibly if he loses, he might consider retirement. Who knows? It's a really interesting question, and I'm sort of thinking about it as I'm answering. But could it happen? Yeah, I think it could. I think
with a burgeoning Hollywood career as well, he's now got extra revenue streams that he perhaps didn't have a couple of years ago. And with obviously the resources the new owners have in WME, IMG of the UFC, big strong links in the world of film and television in Hollywood. I'm sure he's speaking to the right people and getting the right roles, and that's obviously something he's got an eye on in terms of his long-term career once he hangs it up in mixed martial arts. I still think that even if he was to lose, I think there's a couple of factors that play into my thinking of him perhaps not calling it quits straight away. First of all, I still think he's just far too important for the UFC's position in the UK. Champion or no champion, Michael Bisping has been the poster boy for the UK market for well over a decade now. And I still think some of the other Brits in the UFC roster have a bit of work to do to kind of build up their name and almost take over that role that Michael Bisping he's been carrying for such a long time. So he's very important to the UK market, but also I just think that in terms of just flat out business, I think there's just too many money fights still out there left for Bisping. You mentioned one already, which is the Rockhold rematch. I think there's a Vitor Belfort rematch that could do really well for him. I'm sure he's been bumped up in terms of his contract already since he's become champion. So, I mean, if he mentioned to you he'd like to get 3 title defenses, even if he loses to Dan Henderson, I think there could be 3 big money fights anyway for him. So I'm leaning towards perhaps him not quitting the sport if he loses. And that is basically our last question, Si. And I think we're now in a new territory, new waters. I think this is our longest show ever. And it's funny because I think you and me were both pretty exhausted from our travels over the course of the last 3 or 4 days. And we thought this might be a bit of a quicker show and try and get it wrapped up in an hour. I think this is going to be a little bit longer than an hour. But hey, listeners, let us know if you think me and Simon are rambling on a little bit too long with these shows.
Yeah, we are.
Give us some feedback. Let us know if you'd like our shows to be a little bit shorter, snappier, to the point. And if that's what you want to get out of the MMA or the Brit Pack podcast on a weekly basis, then let us know. If you like it to be longer, you want to hear more thoughts and opinions from Simon and myself, let us know. If that's what you want, we will deliver. But as far as the questions and what we have on the table and on the agenda and on the menu this week, so I think that's a wrap.
It is. Also, I'd love to know how you guys out there actually listen to the show and where you listen to the show. Do you listen on SoundCloud? Do you listen on Stitcher, Acast, iTunes? Let us know how you consume the show and where you do it. Do you do it when you go into the gym, or do you do it on your commute, or do you use the soothing voice of Chamatkar Sandhu and Simon Head to help you fall asleep at night? We need to know all this. This is all good audience research for the Brit Pack. So chuck us a tweet and let us know how you enjoy the show and anything in particular that you'd like to hear on future shows. You can do that by tweeting us at the Brit Pack MMA. You can also tweet us directly if you so wish, at Sandhu MMA for Mr. Chamatkar Sandhu, at Simon Head for me. And listening to the show, I'm sure that as you're listening now, you've got a good idea how to listen to it. But there are a multitude ways of listening to it. You can listen to it via our SoundCloud page, which is soundcloud.com/thebritpack. You can listen to us via Stitcher. Search for the Brit Pack on there. We are also available on Acast. Search Acast for the Brit Pack. There are also, of course, we're on iTunes. Naturally, we're on iTunes. Search for us on there. And if you feel like dropping a review on there and giving us the big ups, then that would be fantastic as well. We're still very new, so we're trying to build our presence. Any kind of positive review you can stick on there for us would obviously be hugely appreciated as we look to help this thing grow and grow as the weeks go on. That, I think, is pretty much all we have on this show. We said, we might make this a quick one, half hour, 45 minutes. I reckon we've nearly done 2 hours. So on that note, we will say thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the fights at UFC 203 this weekend. Think up whatever questions you want for us next week. Get them in nice and early. We do make sure that we have all the best ones written down for the show. Enjoy the fights, and we will speak to you again next Monday.